Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, you know we are discussing Indian architecture, and in the last lecture we tried to understand the architecture during the Neolithic period. Today we will move further and we will talk about the civilizational period, means Harappan period onwards. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in studio the same resource person, Dr. Shankar Kumar. He teaches history in Hindu College, University of Delhi, and has a specialization in ancient India. So, on behalf, I welcome him for the EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amrenji. Good morning, viewers. Yesterday's interaction that we had with you, we were talking about the architectural trends in India, particularly with reference to the pre-Harappan period, because we had started with the Neolithic period and went on to understand the ways and means through which we can utilize architecture as a source or as a window to understand Indian culture and the variety that it offers, and also the process of coming together of several cultural trends, the amalgamation part of it, and so forth. Yesterday's time frame, since it was pre-Harappan, therefore it was guided by basic necessities of dwelling and surviving in those times, in Neolithic times, and yet we saw that the entire stretch, the entire geographical stretch of Indian Neolithic sites offer us very interesting variations, ranging from the pit dwellings at Burza home in Jammu and Kashmir to somewhat technologically robust and sophisticated mud brick houses, of course sun-dried mud brick houses at Mehergarh, to ash mound sites in South India and so forth. So that's how the dwelling units emerged. That's how it got styled in a particular way, and thereafter the next big so to say event or stage in the history of dwelling units and architecture can be had from the Harappan times, which is a full-fledged civilization in the sense that Harappa gives us the evidence of several towns: Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, Rangpur, Dholavira, Kalibangan, and so forth. They are very well developed sites. There are urban dwelling units. There are planned roads, very sophisticated drainage systems for exit of used waters, wells, and several other public utilities or public places that we talked of yesterday, in the sense of making demarcation whether an architectural unit is for private purpose or it is state architecture, in the sense that it is the state at the behest of which that particular structure has come up, and so forth. So these are some of the varieties that we get to see during Harappan period, from 2500 to 1700 BC, which is regarded as the mature phase of Harappan period. On your slide you can see the Mohenjo-daro photograph, and the bricks, which is almost has assumed the iconic proportion so far as Harappan civilization is concerned. They are of uniform size across civilizational stretch, and this is very important. It shows that there must have been some kind of a regulated manufacturing of these bricks, which are the basic building blocks of architectural structures in Harappan civilization. The picture shows you the Great Bath, which is a public utility structure, and another noteworthy thing is that in this Great Bath, since it could have been used for some public bathing with some ritual overtone that we don't know, but it can be guessed, these the underlying bricks of this pool of water was made watertight by the use of bitumen and some other materials, and that shows that the technique deployed in making these structures was fairly developed and quite sophisticated. Then the overall pattern that emerges of the Harappan towns is that the roads cut each other at right angles, and most of the houses which were alongside the roads did not have any opening towards the road. So if one was going or one was traveling on Harappan road or Mohenjo-daro road, you would not see doors and windows of the houses adjacent to you, to the left and right of you. And that gave a very monotonous kind of look. That could have given a very monotonous kind of look to the Harappan structures, dwelling structures, particularly if seen from the roads. But that's how it was, and most of the houses were single-storied, but double-storied houses are also testified in Harappa, and most of the houses had provision for water in the sense of a well, and also for the exit of used water, and therefore hygiene emerges as something very important in the Harappan period, because so much of care and so much of concern for the exit of used water is something which is hardly seen in other contemporary Bronze Age civilizations. Similarly, at yet another site in the Harappan civilization at Dholavira, we find very sophisticated structures, ducts and channels leading to the utilization of water and water sources and so forth, which again gives us some kind of a glimpse of the civilizational life, the everyday life in Harappa, which it has so much premium to the way they used water or the way they transacted their everyday life. And architecture, the material architecture that we still have preserved, of course in the ruin form, give us a very nice clue about these things. So this is about Harappan life. Alongside public utilities like the Great Bath, we also have another characteristic architectural specimen in most of the Harappan towns, and they are the granaries. These granaries are very scientifically made in the sense that they had air ducts and raised platforms for pounding of seeds and so forth, and they also used bricks, stones, and these items, stone items, etc., were probably locally quarried, and that's how the local resources, which we did speak of in our yesterday's discussion, were utilized in the designing of their architectural specimen. So that is about the Harappan civilizational architecture that we get to see, the varieties that we saw. And next stage, so to say, although quite a few Chalcolithic cultures preceded Harappan civilization, but in the western and central India, in the post-Harappan times, we find quite a few Chalcolithic sites emerging, Ahar, Inamgaon, Iran, and Kaitha, and so forth. These are some of the sites which have emerged as very well excavated Chalcolithic sites in the post-Harappan period, the time being from around 2000 to 700 BC, as you can see on your slide. Quite a few of these Chalcolithic cultures, those which lay around the Harappan area or in proximity to that, the late Harappan settlements, they extensively kept using the burnt bricks for building purpose. But most of the Chalcolithic sites that we have listed here on the map, and as you can see on the next slide, this is the typical house of a Chalcolithic culture at Inamgaon. Chalcolithic cultures, as you would know, is that phase of historical development where people were using, of course, stone tools, but in association with copper tools. And the characteristic Indian village of today, the houses that we get to see, and this is extremely important about the Chalcolithic cultures of ancient India, that most of the typical houses of even contemporary India have not been able to breach the architectural design that we get to see in a Chalcolithic culture, particularly at Inamgaon and other west and central Indian Chalcolithic cultures. These houses, quite unlike the Harappan zone, are made of mud and wattle walls. They are not using bricks, and that is something that you can see in the Indian villages even today. And these walls were plastered by cow dung, which is in Hindi referred to as gobar. So that was used to plaster the walls and make it more smooth and livable, and also make it clean. So that is a practice which is very much followed even in today's times in Indian villages. Then the architectural design, if you see, is also either rectangular or circular. So that is the plan, that is the plan layout of a typical Chalcolithic culture house. So you have one kind of open space, rectangular or circular in the center, and rooms surrounding it on 3 or 4 sides. And if you go to the interior of a typical Indian village today, it is very likely that we discover similar kind of plan, of layout plan of Indian village household even today. Most of these houses were single room houses during the Chalcolithic period, but there are quite a few multi-room houses also in places like Inamgaon, which is yet another Chalcolithic site in the Western India. So that is one. And for the roof purpose, how the kind of roof that they used, usually they had some kind of wooden poles which were put along the walls or on the surface, and probably they had some kind of structure which could cover the roof area on that. So the load was supported by those poles which were inserted into holes made on the walls or the surface of that house. So that is how Chalcolithic architecture, so to say, or the layout plan is very much important, particularly in order to explore the anteriority of the plan layout of a typical Indian village of 20th, 21st century as well. So the kind of walls, the plaster, the layout, all quite resemble the way we go about making houses in the rural areas even today. So that tells us about the streak of continuity in the rural houses and their designs that we get to see right from the Chalcolithic periods. Another variation, as you can see on your slide, this is a sample of a megalithic culture. This is not a habitation site that we are showing here. This is probably the rituals and the architecture associated with burying the dead, which was followed not only in Deccan but also beyond. These are referred to as megalithic cultures. This is an Iron Age culture, and this is about a society which is not completely unaware of farming. So they know about food production, they know about farming, but alongside they also engage in pastoral activities. And why I am showing you here this particular picture is because here huge stone monoliths are used in a particular fashion, in a particular way, and there is no singular way. There is a variety of megalithic arrangement of these monoliths across India, betraying some bit of regional features also. But this is to ensure that the person buried, the dead person, has some kind of an afterlife or some ideas associated with it. There are, if we talk of the typologies of these megaliths, there are one kind of megaliths where the actual corporeal remains are buried, and there could be another where corporeal remains are not there, but it is made purely as some kind of structure in commemoration or just to memorize, just to give some kind of a long-term memory or established in memory of the dead person. There are very fine transdisciplinary studies going about these megalithic cultures and the arrangement or the design of these stones, these monoliths, which might have something to do with astrophysics or one can say sighting the rising sun or the sun setting, or something to do with astrological or astronomical phenomena. So the alignment of these monoliths in a particular way and what could be the underlying ideas, these are the issues which are being looked at by the historians today in a transdisciplinary fashion to figure out what could have been the idea beneath this. And it is increasingly getting established that it might have to do something with astronomical entities or sighting some celestial objects or something related to astronomical phenomena. So this is yet another kind of feature that we get to see in another specimen offered by megalithic cultures of Iron Age Indian past. Next, we can say the time block that we should stop at is something which is regarded as the axial period of ancient Indian history, and that is the 6th century BC. Please remember that 6th century BC is the time when Buddha was born, when Mahavir Jain was born. This is the time of the Upanishads. This is also the time when in Indian history, for the second time, if we regard continuity from the Harappan times, we find the second wave of urbanization hitting the Indian landscape, or to say Indian polity. And all across the North India and the Northwestern India, and also some part of Deccan, we find existence of towns. There are merchants, there is profusion of coins, metallic coins, and commercial activities is getting a fillip. Territorial states are coming up in a big way. Monarchy is emerging as the triumphant polity in these times, and this is the time of the Mahajanapads and so forth. And as you can see on your slide, this is an impressionistic account. This is not the real picture, but it is an impressionistic account of Kushinagar, which is associated with, of course, the heterodox sects, Buddhism. And here you find that these are the structures made. Of course, it could have been exaggerated representation, and one has to see whether it is archaeologically verified or not. You can see that on the edge of these structures there is a water passage which is moat. And of course, this moat served the purpose. You can see an elephant coming out of the main gate over some kind of an artificial bridge which has been created, and this water body was some kind of a strategic defense against enemies. So this is kind of a killa, this is kind of a fort that we get to see. Of course, this is a more beautified, exaggerated form of the structure. Nevertheless, it does give us a crucial insight into the way people thought of or imagined the space around themselves, and the way in which they thought about beautifying it. So that is a crucial peep into the architectural design and minds of people in ancient India around 6th century BC. So that is something that we need to understand. And also important is the fact that in material terms, in real excavated terms, there has not been many findings of the actual remnants of such buildings. Nevertheless, if we move ahead, which is part of the same sequence of historical change, and we come to the Mauryan times, which is around 300 BC, around that area, around that time, in the same zone, that is North India, we find that all these tendencies of urban centers, trade, merchant, coins, etc., they were all the more solidifying. They had become more intense during the Mauryan period. And the Mauryan period stands for some spectacular architectural marvels. Not all the buildings have survived, and it could be because of the building material that was used. Whether we read Megasthenes' Indica or even some of the archaeological remnants unearthed from the banks of Ganga around the present day Patna, which was Patliputra of this period, which was the capital of the Mauryans. And also at the place at Patna, that is the Patliputra, called Kumharar, which probably housed the palace, the royal palace. and there is evidence of the ash, huge collection of ash, and it probably shows that the building, the palace, extensively used wood and timber of high quality, and most of these structures, perhaps architectural structures, were made of timber, and there was extensive use of wood, and the polishing of wood, etc., was very developed, and that also explains for the fact that we don't have enough surviving evidence of these architectural masterpieces. Nevertheless, by the time we reach Ashoka's period, who happens to be the third in the line of succession of rulers from the Mauryas, that is Chandragupta, Bindusar and Ashok. So by his time, there is a crucial change in the architectural trend of India, and there is more and more usage of stone alongside wood and timber. And therefore, this transition is crucial from the historical point of view, because being made of stone and huge monoliths, mostly of sandstone, red sandstone drawn from the Chunar hills, which is around the eastern edge of present-day Uttar Pradesh, near Allahabad. So that is the area from where sandstone was extensively quarried, and very polished monoliths or monolith pillars were made. The one on your slide, as you can see, is the famous Lauriya Nandangarh pillar inscription. The national emblem, that is the Sarnath pillar, is something which is extremely famed, which is four-lioned pillar of Ashok. They are architectural marvels in the sense that the pillars are very slender, tapering, and they have a capitol at the top of it. As you can see, the inverted lotus-like structure over which the lion is sitting is in fact a reminder of the Persian influence on the Mauryan art and architecture, and therefore the Mauryan samples of architectural remains and architectural marvels tell us about the foreign contact also during the period. And subsequent to this period, of course, we shall be talking about it, there is very overwhelming Greek influence also. But more important is the fact that alongside these pillars and rock structures, we also have the emergence of what we today understand as Buddhist stupas. And stupas, as you can visualize, we will show you the figures of the pictures of some of the stupas also. These are kind of a hemispherical bodies which are constructed, but it is not hollow from inside. So it is not a dome. In the sense, it gives the impression of being a dome-like structure, but it is all stuffed from inside. So there is some material inside, and of course it has a ritual significance. So there is a casket at the top of it with a chhatri, and the gateways surrounding it and so forth. These structures had started being made during the Mauryan times, during the Ashokan times, of course in the context of Buddhism, and Buddhist school of architecture is also supposed to have begun around this time, and it got more intensified in the subsequent post-Mauryan period. But the genesis is here. And another important thing to note is that in the Ashokan period or in the Mauryan period, these stupas had more hemispherical look, and it got more cylindrical subsequently as we move further. Rock-cut caves again make their beginning here, and from these mountains on some suitable edges of these mountains, some structure was carved, and Buddhist monks used to live in these structures, so they emerged as monasteries, which again offers yet another variety of architectural masterpieces that we get to see from the Ashokan period or Mauryan period in general. This is yet another, as you can see on your slide, this is just, I use this to show how polished the Ashokan inscriptions are. So this particular slide shows you the craftsmanship associated with Ashokan pillars, and here you can see something engraved also. Of course, these are royal edicts. So the sheer glaze which is there maintained to the present time. So you can just imagine how beautiful and how aesthetically satisfying, gratifying these structures could have been at the time of their manufacturing. This gives you the view of a Mauryan time stup, which is a Sachi stup, much famed Sachi stup. Please understand that the carvings, etc., which you see on this photograph is a subsequent addition. It was in the Shunga period, which is subsequent to the Mauryan period, that these stone kind of surroundings were made. Earlier, it could have been, during the Mauryan period, it could have been bare kind of a thing, or at the most, it could have been wooden enclosure, and it was replaced by stone enclosure, stone surroundings, walls, and the gateways. These are subsequent additions. For the Mauryan period, suffice it to say that we had hemispherical covered dome-like structure as a stup. The decorative parts are subsequent additions in the post-Mauryan period, which again tells us about something very interesting that we shall subsequently talk about. This is the layout plan, circular and rectangular or square-like layout in the middle, and with the provision for casket and chhatri at the top. So this is the usual Sachi plan. Most of the stupas followed this plan. Of course, there were some regional variations in the case of Amravati, which is in the Nagarjun Konda area in Andhra Pradesh, and there were other stupas also betraying some bit of regional variation. This is, as you can see on your slide, this is a rock cut structure, and this is a Buddhist Chaitya hall. So here the building material is naturally provided. Of course, it's part of some mountain, and into these mountains things were dug out and engraved in such intricate ways, and that tells you about how beautifully these engravings were done and what must have been the site layout plan. This is a cross-sectional view of the Karle Chaitya, and subsequently this went on to become the sculptured idiom of Indian architecture. And in fact, this is the beginning of the temple architecture that we get to see in profusion in the Gupta and post-Gupta period. So the huge monoliths that we get to see in the South India in the early medieval part of our history actually in architectural sense made its beginning here, and this is an example of that. Also important in the post-Mauryan phase is the emergence alongside the Buddhist school of art is the Gandhar Shaili and the Mathura Shaili of making sculptures, which had tremendous impact on the architectural history of India as well. It strongly reminds us of Hellenistic influence. The cover that Buddha is using here, the cloth over his body, is made in such a way which appears to be transparent. So it is a cloth, yet you can see the inside body, the matted hair, the posture. So it beautifully combines the matter which is entirely drawn from Indian religion and Indian mythology. So the content is very much Indian, and the artistry is quite remindful of the Hellenistic trends or the Greek trends or Greek skills. So that is how we see that architecture and sculpture traditions grew in the post-Mauryan period. And also important is that during the Mathura school of art happenings, we find that it is not confined to Buddhism, but it also takes care of the sculptures from other religions, Jain Tirthankars or even Shaivites and Vaishnav traditions. They are also depicted in human form. So human representation as a sculptured object, that is a trend which started during this period, and subsequently in the Gupta period, which probably we will be talking about tomorrow, is the classical period of Indian architecture, Indian artistry, where all these trends actually reached its zenith. And these materials, these techniques got perfected. And thereafter we see, even in the early medieval period, a lot of ornamentation and decorative things, and there is a fair degree of religious ethos beneath this in the form of Heenyan, Mahayan. Mahayan was very important because it allowed such votive donations and so forth. So that constituted the political and social context of the kind of architecture and sculpturing that we get to see in profusion in the post-Mauryan period.
Okay. So, well friend, tomorrow we will discuss the Gupta period architecture and temple architecture.
Yes.
So
we will go up to the Mughal and modern period.
Okay. So, well friends, with this word we conclude the lecture today, and I thank all of you for watching the lecture. And on behalf, I thank Dr. Shankar Kumar for giving such a insightful lecture on this very topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.